Hello everyone, welcome to the 2023 book tag. This tag and video idea was created by Destiny Sidwell. She's one of my favorite booktubers, so I will link her profile in the description box as well as all of the questions if you want to create this video yourself. We have 22 questions to get through, so let's get started. The first question is most disappointing book of the year, and I have a few. So my first one is The Stolen Heir by Holly Black. Now, if you don't know, Holly Black wrote the Cruel Prince / the Folk of Air trilogy. This was one of the first fantasy series aside from ACOTAR that I read when I first started getting back into reading, and I really loved the Folk of Air trilogy. This book is connected to the same world, but it's in a different timeline and it follows different characters. It's taking place in the same world, but there's very little crossover as far as characters and plots go. And honestly, I think my expectations were just really high because I did love the Cruel Prince and all of those books so much, and this one was a little bit of a letdown for me. I think I gave it like 3 stars. My next 2 disappointing reads are in the Serpent and Dove trilogy. They're books 2 and 3 called Blood and Honey and Gods and Monsters. I read the first book towards the start of the year and I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it like a 4.25 stars. So I was super excited to go into the next 2 books, but honestly they just did not live up to the first book at all. The second book really let me down. It was a total 180 from the plot of the first book, and the characters were all getting on my nerves, and it did get a little bit better in the third and final book of the trilogy, but in my opinion it still just wasn't nearly as good as the first book. And honestly, these 2 books could have been combined into one book and I probably would have liked it a lot more. And my last disappointing reads of the year was the entire Shadow and Bone trilogy. Now I know this might be controversial because this is a lot of people's favorites and there's a TV show made out of it, and the Grishaverse is wildly popular, and while I absolutely loved Six of Crows, I don't know what it was about this trilogy for me. I still liked it enough to continue the series, but I don't really understand all the hype with it, I guess. I was expecting this to be an epic fantasy that I fell in love with, but it was really just mid in my opinion, so that's why it's going on the list for most disappointing. For question number 2 on the tag, we have Underdog Book of the Year, and there was only one answer for this, The Gracier by Kim Leggett. I'm really not sure how you pronounce her last name, and I don't have the physical copy with me currently because I did lend it out to my mom. This book is one that I picked up off of the blind book dates table at Barnes & Noble, so I had no clue what it was, but I was intrigued by the description on it, and basically I would describe this book as a dystopian horror / thriller. And I always tell people, if you like The Hunger Games, Divergent, or any like classic dystopians like Lord of the Flies or Handmaid's Tale, then you would love this book because it's kind of like all of that combined. I won't go too much into the plot, but if anything about that sounds intriguing to you, I highly suggest reading it. And this is my Underdog Book of the Year because, one, I never hear it talked about. I have seen some booktubers here and there reading it, but no one really raves about it in the same sense of how I felt about it. Question number 3 is a book that was overhyped. I know people are gonna get mad at me, but the Magnolia Parks book, I so far have only read this one, but I do plan to continue the series. It's not that I didn't like this book, I just think it's so overhyped on the internet that I went into it expecting to think it was the best book ever, and it was fine. It was good and entertaining, but I didn't fall in love with it or anything, and I don't really understand all of the hype around it, but I still do need to continue the series, so my opinions may change on this. Moving on, question number 4 is favorite book couples of the year, and I have a lot, so I'm just gonna name them off and not pull out all of the books. Be warned, this could be spoiler territory if you haven't read some of these books or series yet, so if you don't want to risk getting spoiled, I suggest skipping ahead a little bit. This shouldn't take long, but I'm not gonna give away too much information, so hopefully it won't be that spoilery, but you have been warned. Just off the top of my head, my favorite book couples were Amelia and Wrath from Kingdom of the Wicked, Warner and Juliet from the Shatter Me series. We also have Brianna and Jacob from Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, Zayden and Violet from Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, also Harriet and Wynn from Happy Place, Peyton and Kai from Powerless, Iris and Roman from Divine Rivals, and then last but not least, this is probably the biggest spoiler couple on this list, so once again you've been warned. I did do a reread of ACOTAR this year. It's one of my favorite series and I like to reread it every year, and Feyre and Rhys stay at the top of my favorite book couples list always. I don't think anyone or any couple will ever take their place at the top of that list. Moving on, we have favorite main characters of the year, and this is a hard one for me because most of my favorite main characters are from books that I've read in previous years, but from this year in 2023 alone, I would have to say say some of my favorite main characters are both Daisy and Billy from Daisy Jones and the Six. Also Violet from Fourth Wing, but specifically book 1. She did get on my nerves a little bit in book 2, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But her character in book 1 I absolutely loved. Also Harriet from Happy Place. I love everything about Happy Place, but Harriet in particular I felt was such a relatable and real character. Then an interesting one I have is Enzo from the book The Art of Racing in the Rain. Now if you don't know about this book, it's from the perspective of a dog. So the main character Enzo is a dog and you're reading the entire story through his eyes. And the reason that Enzo the dog is on my list of favorite main characters is because I've never read a story like that before, and it was so interesting and refreshing to read a story through a dog's eyes. And then my last favorite main character of the year was Payton from Powerless. The next question on the list is a book that surprised you, and I wasn't sure if I should take this as like the plot itself was surprising or it surprised me in the sense that I wasn't expecting to love the book so much. So I took it as the latter way, and those books that I wasn't expecting to necessarily love that I did were The Gracier. As I already mentioned, I don't have the physical copy on me, but easily one of my favorite books of the year, and I was shocked that I loved it so much because I went into it completely blind. Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I had never read Abby Jimenez before, but I'd heard great things about her. I actually picked this book out as one of my book of the month box picks, and I absolutely loved it. I think I read it in one sitting, and the way this book discusses mental health and the dynamic between the two main characters was honestly just amazing to read. I think about this book still. It was wonderful, and I look forward to reading more Abby Jimenez books in the future. Another one that really surprised me was Divine Rivals. Now I didn't know much about this going into it, but I did pick it up because I'd seen it was getting talked about on Book Talk and was becoming more popular, and I wasn't necessarily expecting to love it just from the little bit of description I had heard, but I absolutely fell in love with this. I would describe this as like a historical fiction fantasy romance, which is a genre I'd never really read before. I thought the concept of it was very interesting and the prose was beautiful. It was fantasy, yet the writing in it was so lyrical, which isn't necessarily something I would think I would like, but I absolutely loved this book. The next question is new favorite author you discovered in 2023, and I cannot pick just one. First up, we have Abby Jimenez, and I actually only read one book by her in 2023, which I just talked about. But the second I finished that book, I started ordering and going out and hunting for all her other books because that's how much I loved Yours Truly and enjoyed her writing style. Another one is Lisa Jules. She's a thriller author. Lisa Jules somehow manages to make the books thrilling and very compelling while also making you still root for the characters, or at least care about what's going to happen to the character. Another thriller author that is one of my new favorites is Frida McFadden. I like Frida because she writes very fast-paced, very engaging thrillers. Both of her books that I read in one sitting. It is impossible to put them down. Her thrillers are just fun, easy reads with great plot twists, and I will be reading more of her in the future. And then a last new favorite author of the year is Emily Henry. Surprisingly, before 2023, I had never read Emily Henry before, but in the year of 2023, I read all of her books and absolutely fell in love with her writing style and characters. She is definitely an auto-buy author for me moving forward into the future. Question number 8 is happiest read of the year, which was honestly really hard for me because as it turns out, I didn't read that many happy books. I mean, I read a lot of books that made me happy because I loved the book so much, but as far as plot itself goes, I really didn't read that many books that were just like super happy and blissful. However, there are some I can name that kind of fit this category, and the first one I've already talked about twice. It's Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This one just made me feel good inside. I mean, there was conflict that was going on and serious things that were being discussed, but I just loved the characters and this plot made me so happy. I was smiling while I was reading it, so therefore I'm sticking it on the list for happiest books of the year. And then secondly, just any Emily Henry book. Once again, they discuss serious topics, but the overarching plot itself just makes me feel like warm and happy and good inside, and that's one of the reasons I love Emily Henry so much. Next, we have most frustrating book of the year, and first I want to talk about Bunny by Mona Awad. This is the first and potentially the last dark academia book I'm going to read. There were some things about this book that I really loved, and then there were some things about this book that I really hated, and there were some things that I finished the book and was still confused about, which I think maybe is kind of the point, but I did have to look up like explanation videos of kind of what the plot meant. But this was such a confusing read, and I don't even want to explain to you why it confused me, because if you're interested in reading this, I think you just need to go into it and have the experience of being confused, because basically you are the entire time. There's very little about the plot of this story that makes sense. I didn't dislike it, but it definitely was a frustrating and a little bit hard to get through book. But either way, I am glad I read it. It just is a frustrating read. And the other one, I'm scared to say my other frustrating book because I loved this book. And I actually did not rate this book. On Goodreads, I rated it a 5-star just because I needed to rate it something. But I really have no clue what I would rate this book in my mind. And that is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. Fourth Wing was one of my favorite reads of the entire year. I literally went to a midnight release party for this book. I own 2 copies of this book. I eat up everything about the world of Fourth Wing. Love it so much. But this book was so frustrating to me. If you've read it, I hope you can relate, but just the dynamic between the characters to me was really frustrating, especially after everything in the first book that happened between the characters, the development they have, all the things they had to work through and go through to now come into this book and have such conflict going on. And this isn't even like the overarching conflict I'm talking about here. I'm also trying to explain this without giving too much away about the plot, but just the character dynamics between a lot of the main characters in this really aggravated me, and it was so frustrating to read. That doesn't mean I didn't love it. I did still love this book, but I just wanted them to catch a break. Yeah, pretty frustrating, but I still loved it. Still one of my favorite books. Question number 10 is best adaptation of the year. I would have to say the number one best adaptation of a book I read this year was easily Daisy Jones and the Six. Not only was this one of my favorite books of the entire year, but the TV show was just as good. I mean, obviously when you're changing something from a book to film or TV, it cannot be the exact same. That would literally be impossible, but I felt like the TV show stuck very true to the plot line and the characters of this book. And also, can we just talk about the music in that show for a second? Those songs sounded exactly like how I would have imagined them in my head while reading this book, and watching this show only made me more obsessed with the characters in this story, and I still think about them on the daily. And then I'm also gonna give an honorable mention to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I thought the movie did a great job. I saw it in theaters and I highly enjoyed the adaptation and felt like it still stayed true to the general story and world of the Hunger Games. The next question is the longest book of the year I read, and I think it's actually tied between Gods and Monsters from the Serpent and Dove trilogy and Iron Flame book 2 in the Empyrean / Fourth Wing series. I don't remember the page count, but I know when I looked it up on Goodreads, they were the exact same page length. So those are the longest 2 I read. This one took me over a week to read, I think, but I was a little bit in a slump when I read this. This one I finished in like 2 days, a day and a half. And then for the shortest book I read, it either has to be the novellas that follow Hopeless by Colleen Hoover or the Steminist novellas. I actually bought those as a book, and it's called Loathe to Love You, but this actually has 3 different novellas inside of it. I didn't actually go look up the page counts, but I know that one of those books, either these novellas or the Coho novellas, have to be the shortest because I didn't read anything else that was that short. Question number 13 is favorite cover of the year, and I am tied between 2. Either Powerless by Lauren Roberts. There is another edition of this that has pink flowers, and I do really want to buy that also, but I just think this cover is stunning. And I was debating between the actual Fourth Wing cover and the special edition Fourth Wing cover, but I'm gonna have to go with the special edition just because I think the red looks so cool and it has that shiny effect on it. And I know technically this isn't part of the cover, but it does have the sprayed edges, which adds to the whole effect of the book. Next up is a book you haven't stopped thinking about. Now there's a lot, but just off the top of my head, these are the ones that I honestly think about maybe once a day. We have Divine Rivals, Powerless, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, The Six of Crows duology, The Inheritance Games trilogy, Happy Place by Emily Henry, Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez, Daisy Jones and the Six, The Grace Year, and then also the Matthew Perry memoir and the Tom Felton memoir. Those are the only 2 memoirs I read this year, but I absolutely loved them, and I think about the stories of those memoirs very frequently. For question 15, we have the cringiest book this year, and honestly, this was the easiest one for me to decide because there is one book I read this year that takes the cake. That is Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld. This was a book of the month book pick, and I will say this is on me. I picked it simply because I thought the cover was pretty, but when you read the title, Romantic and Comedy, you would think the book might be romantic. You might think it might be funny. It was neither of those. If you love this book, I'm sorry, skip to the next part because I hated this book. This book was like a 50-year-old woman was trying to write a 50-year-old character that had the personality of a 12 or 13-year-old. It was not good at all. All the characters were so immature. It felt like there were so many things being thrown in, so many slang terms trying to make the main characters hip, but they were in their 40s and 50s, so it did not work at all. The premise of this book is that the main character works for essentially what SNL is, but she writes comedy skits, explains in depth these comedy skits and how she comes up with these hilarious ideas. Nothing about them were funny at all, and I have seen other booktubers that have talked about how they felt the exact same way reading it. It was like they kept talking about how things were so funny, but nothing was actually funny, and then the romance in this had absolutely no chemistry. And to make things worse, almost the entire second half of this book takes place during COVID. I'm not even gonna say anything else. This book was a waste of my time. Question 16 is an unpopular book you loved, and I honestly don't really think there were any books I read this year that were unpopular, but the closest I can get to fitting into that category is As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the third book in the Good Girl's Guide to Murder trilogy. I picked this book because I've seen the most criticism about it. While this series is extremely popular, the third book specifically is the least popular on the internet out of the trilogy, and I see a lot of criticism against this book for being too dark or straying too far from the original plot that the first book follows. But for me, I personally loved that because it was showing the main character's development and kind of loss of innocence. This book definitely is a lot darker. I'd say the first two books are more of a mystery, whereas the third book is borderline thriller. And this is a YA series, so I get that people have a bone to pick with it, but I still loved it. I thought it was a great way to develop the main character's story because it is kind of in this transition between high school and college, and to me it made sense for the plot and the character, and I really enjoyed it. So because of that, I'm calling this an unpopular book that I loved. Question number 17 on the list is the highest and lowest rated books I read this year. Now I went ahead and looked this up on Goodreads before filming the video, and I also want to say this is not counting my ACOTAR rereads because I know if I did include that, those would probably be the highest rated. So aside from that, two highest rated were Crooked Kingdom at a 4.6 on Goodreads and Fourth Wing at a 4.63. The question also asks if you agree or disagree with the ratings, and I agree, but I also rated both of these books 5 stars. So in some sense, I do disagree, but for an average rating on Goodreads, that makes sense to me. And a 4.6 or higher is extremely high on Goodreads. So in my opinion, both of these books are deserving of that. I loved both of them. And then for our lowest rated books of the year, we have Blood and Honey, which is the second book in the Serpent and Dove trilogy, at a 3.53. We also have The Stranger Upstairs at a 3.51. This was a thriller book that I read as a book of the month box pick, and I actually really enjoyed this book, so I was surprised it was rated that low. The other lowest rated one is Bunny, which I already discussed was a frustrating book for me, and that had a 3.52 on Goodreads. Blood and Honey at a 3.53, I can agree with and understand. I honestly don't remember what I initially rated that because it was at the very beginning of the year, but I think now looking back, I would probably give it a 3.5 or 3.75. So the 3.53 average rating aligns pretty closely with that. For The Stranger Upstairs, this is the one I'm the most shocked by. For it to have a 3.51, I gave this book a 4-star. It wasn't the best thriller I'd ever read, but I did really enjoy it. So if you're looking for a thriller book, I personally would recommend it. I think it deserves higher than a 3.51. And then for Bunny at a 3.52, that makes sense to me. I think I gave it a 3-star, but I can see why some people would really enjoy it, especially if you like literature and dark academia. And I can also see why some people would dislike it even more than I did because it is a very confusing read. Question 18 is favorite quotes of the year, and while I have so many, there aren't that many books that I annotate. However, I did annotate Happy Place, so I'm gonna share a couple of my favorite quotes from that book, even though there's so many in it that I loved. So I actually just skimmed through the book really quick. I have so many favorite quotes from this book, but I just found 3 really quick. The first one is, "We fall into that hyper comfortable kind of silence, the quiet of two people who have lived together for the better part of 5 years and still, after all this time, have a muscle memory for how to share space." I love that. It's so simple, but it's so great. And then I also highlighted, "Our love is a place we can always come back to, and it will be waiting, the same as it ever was. You belong here." And that is so sweet. And then the last one that I found really quick while flipping through the pages is, "But the truth is, if I could take it all back, I would. I'd do anything to go back to that happy place outside of time where nothing from real life can touch us. And that's just 3 like little examples. This book is filled with great quotes. So while I have a million different quotes that I wish I had time to share, this one takes the cake for just best quotes in general. Question number 19 is book with a unique concept, and I have 2. The first one is The Grace Year, which once again don't have the physical copy, and I did already describe it, but I've never really read a dystopian that was also a horror slash thriller, and it's like the perfect combination of Handmaid's Tale, Lord of the Flies, and The Hunger Games, and it incorporates so many interesting topics that prompt just kind of your thoughts. Like, I was left thinking about the book for honestly days, months, and I'm still thinking about it now. That book just really knows how to get you thinking, and it has great parallels to modern society. And then my other one is The Art of Racing in the Rain, which I just talked about a minute ago, and I can't seem to find the book now, but that's the one I mentioned where it's from the perspective of a dog. And like I already said, I've never really read anything like that, so to me that was one of the books I read with the most interesting concepts. Question number 20 is a book that you would reread, and while there's so many, I'm just gonna mention a few. Obviously the ACOTAR books, because I do a yearly reread of that anyway. Also from this year specifically, there are some that I would reread. The Grace Year that I was just talking about, I would definitely reread Happy Place. There's so many things I can compare to my own life, and I think as I get older I will have an even stronger appreciation for that book, so I would like to reread it at some point in the future. Also Fourth Wing, just because that's one of my favorite books of the year, and I know the series is going to continue, so I think it would be fun later down the line once I know more things about the plot to go back and reread the first book and just see how many things kind of get hinted at through the beginning of the story. Question 21 just says reflect on your reading goal and compare it to what your reading goal will be for 2024. So my reading goal for 2023 was 75 books. I'm currently at 65 books, 66 books, I think. I definitely don't think I am going to hit the 75 mark by the end of December. It's currently December 20th as I'm filming this video. I would like to read maybe 4 more books if I'm lucky, but if I'm being realistic, I think I'll probably read 2 or 3 more books. But I didn't hit that reading goal, so I think for next year, instead of setting my reading goal so high like I did this year, I may set it at like 65 or maybe even 70. I know that doesn't seem like much of a difference between 70 and 75, but some months I only read 5 books, so that 5 books could be a whole month worth of reading, and then if I go over it, it'll make me feel even more accomplished, because this year I definitely did get really wrapped up in my reading goal and it started to feel overwhelming, and I try to remind myself that reading is not a competition and I want it to just be for fun. So I think I'm definitely for 2024 gonna set something a little bit lower, a little bit more attainable that I actually think I can reach. And then the very last question says, after 2023 reading, what are you prioritizing in 2024 reading wise? The number one thing I'm prioritizing I kind of just touched on, and that's to not make reading a competition with myself. I want reading to just be for fun. For example, if I set a TBR, I don't want to feel like I have to stick to it, and if I set a reading goal, I don't want to feel like I absolutely have to reach that goal. I want to read at my own pace, enjoy the books I'm reading, and honestly be more of a mood reader. Another goal I think I'm going to set for myself is to read at least 5 classic books. I did post a TikTok video recently where I was going through the Goodreads most rated books, and there were a lot of classics on there, and people were bashing me in the comments saying that I'm not cultured, that I'm not well read, they can't believe I haven't read these classics, I have no taste. And I don't want to read more classics simply for those people, because I think no matter what you read, that doesn't change the fact that you're a reader. Everyone has different tastes, and I myself am not a classics reader. I like fantasy romance, I like fantasy in general, I like contemporary romance, but I would like to expand my horizons a little bit just for my own personal interest, kind of just tap into a genre that I don't know as much about and see what I think about it. So I'd like to try and read at least 5 classic books by the end of 2024. And another thing I want to do is try to read at least 5 memoirs. I read 2 memoirs this year, and while that isn't a genre I read frequently, I highly enjoyed both memoirs I read, and because of that I want to read more memoirs and just learn more about people's stories and people's lives. My only other goal is to spend less money on books, aka not buy as many books as frequently, and the main reason for that is a second part to this goal, and that's that I want to read more books on my physical TBR. I haven't counted, but I probably have more books that I haven't read than that I have, so I'd really like to get around to reading some books on my shelves that have been sitting up there for over a year, or even books that I've bought recently and just haven't read yet, and I'd like to prioritize those books before prioritizing going out and buying new books. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, this book tag. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more book related content, you can head over to my TikTok page. I'll have it linked in the description box. I post book related content on there very frequently, but also don't forget to subscribe to this channel to see more videos like this. In the year of 2024, I will be posting more book related content, and I do have a lot of stuff up already that I'd love for you guys to go and check out. If you'd be interested, don't forget to like and comment below if you've read any of these books and if you agree with my opinions on them, and also what your goals are for reading in 2024. And thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye guys.